it'll start. It says going live, and then it'll say going like live. Hi everyone, welcome back to another great talk. I say I'm excited for all of these, but that's because I am. I am here with James Robinson, and he has multiple roles, but he is one part the partnership lead for ADP List. If you were at our event earlier this evening, you heard from Vicky, and she's also a mentor at ADP List. So I'm gonna put that link in the chat, but basically it's a great website for connecting with mentors and learning more about UX and product design. And I'm sure he might speak more about it because he's definitely very involved in that space. But he also works for Proxy, and I think that was a recent position as well. But he is here tonight to talk with us about interfaceless UX experiences. And yeah, I'm really excited to have you here, James. So thanks for giving up your Saturday night to help us out, and take it away.
Thank you, Rachel. Let me just present first. Give me 1 second, everyone. Share. And then I need to present. Awesome. Cool. So anyway, as Rachel said, hi, my name is James. It's really great to be here. Thank you for having me. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about what it means to design the interaction between humans and technology, and how by going beyond the confines of the screen, we can rethink the way that products and interfaces work and what we can do with our technology. I think that it's important to remember that design started in very different places than I think people think of it now when they think of digital design. Design started from graphic design. It started from industrial design of things like furniture, and it started in other related industries. Sort of came over to design solutions. You would see, I know, painters painting camouflage. That's a design solution for what you might call a product, but that's in many ways. I think that speaks to how design is a hodgepodge of like cross-discipline. So I think we can often forget how much we're on the cutting edge of what design means, not just what technology means as well. So I am excited to tell you about how I think the design industry is moving away from this idea that screens are like the end-all be-all of the way that we interact with even our screen-based devices. And so we'll talk about that. Firstly, let's start with like, what are interfaces? I think everyone seems to have like an intuitive understanding of what this is, but it is also, surprising to find this. When people think of interfaces, they think of phones. They think of screen-based things for the most part. We tend to gravitate towards screens things as designers. This is understandable for a wide variety of reasons. Screen-based interfaces are the most common products we use every day, probably the most visibly designed products we use. And they're also unique in how adaptable they are. If you look back to when Steve Jobs announced the iPhone, he spends a lot of his time, maybe the majority of his time, talking about how it's this all-screen experience with no plastic. That's not just, a nice visual change. That has a real impact in the sense that now we have adaptable interfaces. The interface is not fixed. It's not like you're stuck with the keys on the keyboard all. But as our devices have gotten better, the fact that they have touchscreens, the fact that there are these multi-touch experiences is no longer perhaps the most exciting interaction opportunity that they present. There are so many more signals to use now, including these really great cameras. The iPhone 12 Pro, for example, just came out, has 4, 3 in the back, 1 in the front, GPS, a new LiDAR 3D scanner on the back there, and a whole bunch of other stuff as well. And we've also found better ways to use existing or older technologies, such as, for example, Bluetooth. Back in the day, Bluetooth was imagined as this file transfer tool. it was slow and relatively power intensive, but now with BLE, that's Bluetooth Low Energy, we can do things like use signal strength to triangulate a phone's position in 3D space. So these are common beacons. No doubt you're familiar. And a good example of this, if you're not, is you can get the Store app on iOS and go into a physical Apple Store, and you'll see that the experience changes. This is made possible with a combination of geofencing, again, GPS, and things like BLE that tell your phone that an Apple Store. They're being used for everything from those kinds of unique store experiences once you're there to even being able to tell you about a specific experience that you're right in front of. So you can set the specificity of this narrowly, and that's kind of my thing. And so when you have these devices that do all of these things, they're no longer really just screen vehicles. They are so much more. They're internet devices that also know where they are. They know what other devices that they're near. Look at, for example, the fact, as the example here, look at how the iPhone has a wideband chip to determine its proximity to HomePods throughout the home. All of these kinds of technologies enable us to use those indicators as an interface. What if instead of interacting with your phone to silence it, instead you were to get up and move across the room? We can detect that. And to the degree that we can detect that, that's something that we could use as an expression of user intent and therefore as an interface. More about that in just a sec though. But as you can imagine, with all this additional information that we have, there's all this concern about how it's going to be used, and very understandably. Ads like this being run by Apple, again, pick iPhone, but this is true across the industry, in which there's a renewed interest in emphasizing the privacy aspects of despite the fact they're so aware in ways that they never have been before. But I think that even with that, there's still, I think, a bit of resistance to the idea that your phone occupies all of your attention. Ironically, in this ad here, yeah, sure, the person's face is obscured. There's this metaphor, iPhone's protecting your identity. But it also feels like it's consuming your attention, doesn't it? You can't even make eye contact with this person. And you almost have to stop and ask yourself, whatever happened to interfaces like a light switch? There's no better interface than a light switch. It's so simple and straightforward. It's on or it's off. You just push a button. And it's no wonder, therefore, that you see across screen-based interfaces that are somewhat skeuomorphic, like switches, for example, to take the light switch, that mirror what people are already familiar with in the physical world. A great example of this, for example, material design by Google, particularly on Android, where there's this metaphor of tactility, of paper and material with the z-axis. Stuff stacks on top of other things, and you can move them around. And the user's expression of intent is literally sort of virtual spatial environment. In order to organize my thoughts, I'm going to move these materials into the spaces that they need to be. This is kind of an extension of what did this first, the desktop on computers. Literally like a desktop, that you have in real life, where you can move around your papers in order to organize stuff. You might move around your icons or move around windows. This kind of like organizational metaphor, as we might call it, it comes from physical world. It comes from this skeuomorphic thing in concept, even if not in visual design. And it's familiar and feels sort of safe and nice. But what if we could sort of break beyond that and think about maybe we replicate the physical world within our devices, but instead we can use the physical world as I think, back in the day, there was much more of a divide between what was a technology device and then everything else. And there wasn't all this interoperability. But as you see things like lights and stuff, these are smart lights, they're illuminating me right now, and smart light switches and connected home and IoT and all of this stuff, you have an opportunity to use your entire house as the screen with which you would otherwise be interacting with your virtual world. Instead of tapping to turn on my lights on my phone, I'll literally press the light switch with the same convenience that I'd get if I were controlling it just from my phone. an article from the New York Times sort of about how we've reached peak screen, and there's a revolution, how people are kind of fed up with this idea that every single thing in their life would be on a screen and it would consume their attention. So all of this is just to say that there is, I think, a big opportunity as designers to reconsider the way we design experiences, getting away from this preconception that we need a interface, an on-screen interface, that is, to act as a vehicle for user intent. We don't. There are other means by which we might be able to determine that, and I'd like to talk about some of those right now. So, it's a design conference, right? So we have to talk about Dieter Rams' classic. But it is true. We say, good design is innovative, good design is unobtrusive, yes, all these things. But most of all, it's as little design as design that's less but better. What if we were to start as high level as we can and as strategic as we can and think about how we could design our environments such that they are responsive to us, not the other way around. So as Rachel was saying, I'm currently a lead product designer at Proxy, where Series B started at building the future of a more welcoming, magical world. As she also said, I just started at this company, and so a lot of the things with this company specifically are very new to me, but the concepts in general are not. And I'd like to tell you a bit about how I came to be so interested in this kind of design challenge. So firstly, Proxy starts with the Proxy app. This app broadcasts a signal that's detected by readers in your physical environment, readers like this. I'll go back to that in a sec. It helps you do so many things. At the moment, it's mostly around unlocking doors and checking you in when you're visiting buildings. It's a new kind of card reader, just like the card reader, no doubt, you have at your university to get into dorms and other such things. The possibilities are really endless for something like this. As you may also know or experience personally, maybe you use it to pay for food. Maybe you use it to, release printing jobs. You use it to do laundry. There's a lot of other things, though, that you can use this for in the physical world, and that is more broadly applicable. You can imagine it can be used to keep you healthier by seeing who comes into proximity with who and what times, by seeing not just who comes into proximity with other individual, but then maybe, let's say someone spends 15 minutes in a particular room, they then leave, and then you enter right after it. Well, as a result of our readers and this kind of spatial awareness, perhaps we're able to determine that that's the case and treat that as a contact, even though you weren't physically there at the same time. And you can imagine you change your thermostat in your room to keep you comfortable. I think it's in the spirit of talking about all this stuff around it not being interfaces, we can think more broadly to the idea that it's not about all of these applications as much as it's about this idea that your environment will just adapt to whatever it is you need and to you as a person, not to your devices or to your having to pull out your phone, unlock it, go find the app in question, and take action at that point. So, like I said, I am just starting with this, but I was first introduced to many of these concepts several years ago at Google. I joined Google on the Identity UX team and worked on this really cool called Smart Lock. And Smart Lock is basically very similar to what the Proxy product is today, except it was mostly for screen-based devices. So things like unlocking your computer, your Chromebook, if you have an Android phone you're signed in with and you approach it, or saving passwords. It's this image of a world without passwords or keys and what we might be able to do if we had that kind of world. And as luck would have it, while I was there, this incredible designer named Golden Krishna, here's a picture of him. He wrote this book called No Interface, or The Best Interface is No Interface. And it's all about how, as designers, we should try as hard as we can to avoid designing visual things wherever possible. Avoid what I think most people would call design. When we think about, I'm a designer, and you think oh, I spend all my day, sketch, Figma, whatever it is, making the images on screen. But really, I think the best expression of design might be none of that at all, and just imagining what people would want in a given moment. How might we be able to do that? Well, one way that people are thinking is with voice. perhaps it's easier to say what you want than to go to a phone and to tap, through various apps and deal with an on-screen interface. One of the challenges with on-screen interfaces is that, let me back up and say, nearly all interfaces exist on a spectrum. On one end, we have utilities. And on the other end, we have things that we might call assistants. The nature of utility is that everything is in the same place all the time. Think about like a calculator, where all of the buttons are always there and always in the same order, and it's predictable and intuitive, and I understand it. We have to ask ourselves, though, does the calculator on your phone really outperform a physical calculator? Perhaps, perhaps not. It depends. Maybe it's beneficial if you have it with you, where you don't have a calculator with you otherwise. But you have to take it out and you have to go through extra effort to go find it. And on the other end, we have these assistant experiences where everything is provided according to your intent. There is nothing that's shown there unless that stuff that you specifically go ask for. And so it starts with you as the originator, where the interaction is going to go. But this doesn't really provide you with any affordance, as we might call it. It doesn't provide you with any understanding of where things are and what you can do. And so interfaces, I think, are great, but also imperfect at this. And it still relies on an interface in the sense that you need to go say something. This is an incredible book we would recommend everyone read, called Voice User Interface Design. The second author there, James, also named James, I met him. He's a creative lead, I believe, at Google, working on the Google Assistant. And I was fortunate enough to be able to sit in on a recording session with Google Assistant, the actual voice read. And you can see here there are various things on the page that she would say, like, sure, home, Starbucks, sure, stuff like that. And it was a really amazing experience to be able to see firsthand how these kinds of interfaces are built, built from the standpoint of being completely user intended. So then, for my role after that, I really and I wanted to, while of course this was focused slightly on different things, it had the same thread as this experience where I created in my head this idea we could we're as minimal as possible, that step back and as little interface as we could possibly get away with. Fiverr was a diversity and inclusion tool for HR, basically. An enterprise app that could detect how discrimination and exclusion is occurring in real time. This was my own start, and I worked on it for a few years before actually making the decision to stop. But Fiverr was based all around this idea of a workplace social graph. Andrew Chen, who is a VP of growth at Uber, and now I think a partner at, I want to say KPCB, don't quote me on that. Or Andrew Norris, one of the two. He talks about this workplace social graph on this episode of this podcast, Inside the Intercom. And he talks about how there's this, all doing work throughout the workplace, and no one understands how that's happening. In between, people are faced with this really hostile environment from the standpoint, of course, of the discrimination bias we were hoping to solve here, but also too from the standpoint they have no idea what's going on around them. Yeah, you know your coworkers, but do you know the people in the building, a little more? Do you understand that from a management structure? And so we kept thinking about how we might be able to make an impact on this. And one of the ways that we did was through this mobile that we designed called Thread, where it would be like this personal identity, but on a phone, based around an assistant UI, like I was saying, where it would be based on who you are and how you interact with others around you. There's a whole bunch of related functionality here, but the point I'm trying to make with this is that it's really incredible to imagine you might be able to have like a version of you, but on a device. More on this in a little bit. Then after that ended, I went to 8 Sleep. 8 Sleep is this really cool Series C startup, and this was its recent role, where we were producing this temperature-controlled sleep tracking bed. On the left here, you can see a traditional mattress. And on the right, this is the Pod, which is a flagship product. You can see this like water cooling and heating that exists in the top surface there. It has a huge impact on how people sleep because temperature is the #1 complaint for sleepers. It's not just, again, that it's a temperature-controlled bed. It's what that thing can provide. Just like it wasn't just and was how we could deliver it. So here we had this feedback loop where engagement wasn't a reliable way for us to determine if our designs were effective because we sleep every night. What does engagement look like? You not going to sleep that night? Of course not. Instead, it was much more about these other indicators. And what we discovered is we could identify how people were sleeping and how well the app was working, even if they never touched the app. Because the app was just a control interface for this hardware. This hardware was effectively part of the interface. Like a light switch or like voice interfaces or something. You didn't need to interact with a screen to tell our product how you would best sleep because we could observe it in real time. As you would toss and turn, we'd make changes in temperature to keep you asleep in an optimal way. And all of this was based around this thing called the hub. Sorry, this is lagging on your screen. It's a video here. It's just like this box that sits next to your bed, and it connects with this temperature control water umbilical to the mattress itself. And that's how all the heating and cooling and stuff happens. And so, of course, this needs a remote. It's a very complex piece of hardware. And so we, of course, had an app with a dial. You could make changes. But what we realized as we built this more and more and more is that this wasn't really where our interface design was. The story that we needed to design around wasn't necessarily just designing on the dial here. It was designing the way that people would, put on additional blankets or something if they felt like these things was too cold. And how could we perhaps identify that through things like sensing instead of just from user intent? This is partnering the interface as a partner with the user rather than as a tool for the user. It's getting out in front of user intent and being predictive rather than relying upon the user to tell us what they would want at any one time. Another great example of this was in the case where we found some confusion around switching sides of the bed. Here you can see on the left, we moved to this side kind of which included the sides of the bed. It's not super important to see the specifics on this. The point, though, is speaks to another aspect of no interface or low interface experience in the sense that it's just like Tesla. Perhaps you're familiar with Tesla cars, and you can see on the left side here, we have a little model of the car itself. And in the key, right, it looks like the physical car. What does this do? This draws a connection between what's on screen and what's in real life. Just like there is a physical car that I've interacted with and seen, so too does that car exist as a picture on screen. It exists in the key. It exists everywhere else throughout the entire experience. That lets us understand that there are multiple ways to control the same thing. To open the trunk of the car here, we literally click that area of the key. To do it on the screen, we tap that area of the car. And to open it from outside the car, we go and physically open that part of the car. And so really we're unifying physical and virtual interfaces into one giant product here with a bunch of different ways that you can interact with it, such that there'd really be no need potentially to interact with the key because I can just open the door. There's no need to interact with the screen potentially because of that same reason. Or there's no need to ever interact with opening the trunk physically because I can do so with the key. And all these interconnect. And we ported that kind of understanding to our product in showing the physical bed. People are like, oh yeah, that's the device I have. And that kind of almost what I sort of call a design hand-eye coordination makes it really easy for the user to understand how the physical world impacts what they're seeing on the digital screen, and vice versa, how the digital screen is impacting the physical world. I made the changes, I see the changes reflected, and now I feel the and temperature on my bed surface. That brings us back to my current work at Proxy, where we're building the future of magical, interfaceless interaction with the world around you. You can imagine what would it be like if we never had to prove to devices who we are? What would it be like if all these things could not just be readily understandable from this hand-eye coordination I'm proposing, but on top of that, immediately customized so that's perfect for you? I really love this quote by Max Fukusawa. Industrial design is interaction design, but with objects as the interface. When we design hardware, we are designing just like we do on the screens, and vice versa. When we design screens, we're designing for hardware, because that's, whatever it is that you design on the screen lives on a hardware device. It lives on a screen, perhaps on your phone, and inevitably, people will view the frame in which you present an interface as part of that. People often say, oh yeah, it's only a few taps to get to something in the app. Right, but how many taps might it be to find the app? How many taps to unlock your phone? How much effort to go across your room to go get the phone? And all of these things must be considered as part of our design intent. And I think that when we consider it in that holistic way, we realize that our scope as designers goes well beyond just designing things on the screen. One of the best examples of this, I really love this, is this thing called the light phone. I'm going to do this here. This incredible minimalist phone, and I love the ad here. It just sort of throws it up on the screen, and it's kind of perfect. And all of you'll see there's like no interface on it. Where do I tap? I mean, I see buttons on the side, but there's pretty much no UI. Once the thing is on, the UI appears from behind the frosted plastic, just like, for example, it appears behind a Nest Thermostat E, if you're familiar with those, or a whole bunch of other devices where not only do you not see the interface, you may not even see that it's a screen until that screen becomes relevant. What if, for example, we didn't notice that there was a screen on our walls until that screen became relevant, at which point the information could magically appear? We can think about this in a holistic way that brings it beyond just digital screen design to be things like industrial design and even things like interior design and urban planning, conceivably. Look at this, for example, Cyber is doing, where people's movement and regular life is the way that we have interfaces adapt to. I want to just sort of end here by talking about how C has just acquired this smart product called Motive. It's really, really cool, and you can imagine carry a phone at all. I want to be very clear, I do not know Proxy's plans because I just joined, but the point is, it speaks to this idea that perhaps we don't necessarily need to go into phones. We don't need to have even what we would perceive to be technology software devices. We can have the most minimal of devices on, maybe just a ring. Maybe it's even implanted in you. Maybe it's some kind of, tattoo or something. All of this acting as whatever signals are required such that this happens magically in the background. Because as the saying goes, any technology that's sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic. And I think as designers, that's the best thing we can do. Create genuinely magical experiences by making it such that the user really has no idea how it's happening, but wow, it's happening. It's just obvious and intuitive, and I barely even noticed that there was design there at all. So, I'll take questions.
First, can I just say, wow, because that really, at least for me, brought up a whole new world of thinking about all of this. And it was funny that you brought up the light phone, because I was actually going to mention that. But one thing that I'm really interested in, and while I'm talking, if there is anyone in the chat who wants to add a question, because we might have time for one more. I was wondering if we could go back to that discussion of, voice assistant type softwares, because I think at least for me, I read this really interesting article. I believe it was by the UN recently, that was talking about how, when we have this type of voice activated software, we're really personifying it more, because this is sort of the natural way of interacting with this technology when it's invisible and talking to it like that. But it was bringing up the fact that there's a lot of the software out there is being genderized, especially as like female. And I was just wondering about what you think of these additional problems that come up by taking things off of the phone experience, really, and trying to move away from that, and how we can navigate those problems. That's a loaded question, I know. Also, I think that if you just click your camera on and off, I think it's gone off.